The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat outside the roadside diner, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 17. It was just past midnight in the dusty outskirts of Willow Creek, where the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling engines and forgotten dreams. Inside, the place was a relic, booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox humming faintly in the corner, and the endless drip of a leaky faucet behind the counter. Olivia wiped down the Formica surface for the third time that shift, her hands trembling slightly as she forced a smile for the last stragglers. She was 28, with calluses on her palms from years of carrying trays and heavier burdens, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. The door chimed, and in walked a man who didn't belong in a place like this, not in the way the truckers did, with their grease-stained caps and weary eyes. He was broad-shouldered, clad in a weathered leather jacket, adorned with faded patches from a club called Iron Vow, the kind that whispered of roads less traveled and loyalties forged in fire. Ethan Hale, though she didn't know his name yet, moved with the quiet assurance of someone who'd stared down storms and come out scarred but standing. His boots thudded softly on the linoleum, leaving faint imprints of desert dust. He slid onto a stool at the counter, his grey eyes scanning the menu without really seeing it. Olivia approached, notepad in hand, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etching lines around her mouth. "Coffee, black," he said, his tone low and gravelly, like tires crunching over gravel at dawn. She nodded, pouring from the pot without a word, the steam rising in lazy curls that carried the bitter aroma of overbrewed beans. As she set the mug down, their eyes met, and something in his gaze, patient, unjudging, cracked the dam she'd built around her stories. It had been a long night. The diner was empty now except for him, and the weight of the day pressed in like the humid air before a thunderstorm. "You look like you've got miles on you," she said, surprising herself. He chuckled softly, a sound that rumbled like a distant Harley engine. "More than I can count, you too. Rough shift." Olivia hesitated, then leaned on the counter, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not the shift. It's everything else. My last relationship, it was awful, the kind that leaves you wondering if you're even worth saving." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The words hung there, laced with the pain of bruises that had faded but memories that hadn't. A man who'd promised the world and delivered only chains, walking out and leaving her to pick up the pieces in a town that chewed up dreams and spat them out. Ethan sipped his coffee, the steam warming his face as he listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. In his pocket, his phone buzzed faintly, a reminder of the life he'd left behind after the war, the brotherhood that had become his anchor. But it was her words that stirred something deeper, an old echo from his own past, a promise made to a sister he'd lost too young to protect the vulnerable, to stand when others turned away. As she spoke, haltingly at first, then with the flood of pent-up hurt, he saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, not just from the ex, but from whispers around town. Rumors of that same man circling back, trouble brewing like thunder on the horizon. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the diner. Olivia glanced at the clock, 1:15 a.m., and wiped her hands on her apron. "Sorry, I shouldn't dump this on a stranger." Ethan's smile was slow, genuine, cutting through the dim light like sunlight piercing fog. Strangers are how stories start changing. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn photo from his wallet. A group of riders, arms linked, faces etched with the bonds of chosen family. "I've got a crew, Iron Vow. We ride for promises like yours, the ones that need keeping." She paused, the weight of his words settling like dust after a ride. What she didn't know was that her ex wasn't just a ghost. He'd tangled with the wrong elements, debts owed to shadows in the nearby city that now threatened to drag her into the storm. Ethan had pulled into the diner on instinct, low on fuel and high on the road's solitude, but fate had other plans. As the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., his phone lit up again, this time a message from an old contact confirming the rumors. The man was coming for her, backed by corrupt locals who'd look the other way for a cut. Ethan stood, leaving a generous tip under the saucer. "You close soon?" Olivia nodded, a spark of curiosity mixing with her wariness. "Yeah. Why?" He met her gaze, that smile holding steady. "Because by dawn, things are gonna look different. You deserve more than awful." She watched him step out into the night, the door chiming behind him like a starting gun. In the parking lot, he straddled his bike, the engine roaring to life with a deep, throaty growl that echoed off the empty highway. Headlights cut through the darkness as he pulled out his phone, dialing the number that would summon the Brotherhood. Across the miles, in scattered garages and backroad hideouts, engines stirred. Ethan had made a call, not just for her, but for the promise he'd buried under layers of scar tissue. The kind of call that turned solitary riders into a convoy, leather-clad guardians against the night's injustices. Olivia locked up the diner minutes later, the chill wind carrying the faint rumble of approaching thunder, or was it bikes? She didn't know yet. But as she drove home through the shadowed streets, an unfamiliar warmth bloomed in her chest. For the first time in years, awful felt like it might bend to something better. The road stretched out, endless and unforgiving, but Ethan rode with purpose now. The first stars of morning pricked the sky as his crew assembled, 20 strong at first, then more, converging like iron filings to a magnet. They'd heard the story over crackling lines. A woman broken by betrayal, a man who'd twisted justice into knots. No guns, no vengeance, just the quiet power of showing up, of honoring what the world had tried to shatter. By the time the sun crested the hills, painting the desert in gold, Ethan led the pack toward Willow Creek, the waitress's words fueling the ride. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was the miles between promise and action. In the quiet hours before light, Olivia lay awake in her small apartment, the walls thin against the world's noise. A soft knock echoed at her door, unexpected, but not unwelcome. She opened it to find Ethan, jacket zipped against the pre-dawn chill, a thermos of fresh coffee in hand. "Told you things would change," he said simply. Behind him, the horizon hummed with the promise of engines, a family forged in motion, ready to rewrite her story. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged silhouette of the Willow Creek hills, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and hesitant gold. Olivia stood in the doorway of her modest apartment, the wooden frame creaking under the weight of the morning chill. Her fingers clutched the edge of the door, knuckles whitening as she took in the sight of Ethan Hale, his silhouette framed against the awakening world. Steam rose from the thermos in his gloved hand, carrying the rich, grounding scent of fresh brewed coffee that cut through the faint mustiness of her hallway. His grey eyes held steady, reflecting the quiet resolve of a man who'd ridden through more than his share of tempests. "You didn't have to come back," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread in the hush. But there was no denial in her tone, only the tentative bloom of something she hadn't allowed herself in years, trust, fragile as the first frost. Ethan extended the thermos, his leather jacket whispering against the fabric as he moved. Promises aren't kept from afar. Besides, coffee's better shared. She accepted it, their fingers brushing in a moment that felt heavier than the ceramic container, charged with the unspoken electricity of lives intersecting at a crossroads. Inside, the apartment was a sanctuary of small comforts, faded curtains filtering the light, a worn couch piled with blankets, and the faint aroma of last night's takeout lingering in the air. Olivia poured 2 mugs, the liquid glugging softly into the chipped porcelain. They sat at her tiny kitchen table, the wood scarred from years of solitary meals, and for the first time since the diner's closing bell, she felt the walls of her isolation begin to crack. Ethan didn't press. He sipped slowly, his presence a steady anchor as she recounted fragments of the nightmare that had been her last relationship. Not the raw details, no need for those shadows, but the echoes. The way promises had twisted into control, the isolation that had seeped into her bones like desert sand. As she spoke, the distant rumble grew, a low vibration that seeped through the thin walls and into her chest. It started as a murmur, like thunder rolling in from the Badlands, then swelled into a symphony of engines, deep, throaty roars that harmonized in perfect, purposeful discord. Olivia's eyes widened, darting to the window where the first rays caught the gleam of chrome. She rose, pulling back the curtain, and gasped at the sight unfolding in the parking lot below. Bikes lined the cracked pavement like sentinels, their riders dismounting with the fluid grace of those who'd spent lifetimes on the saddle. 20, maybe 30 strong, clad in leather vests bearing the Iron Vow emblem, a forged chain linking iron fists, symbol of unbreakable bonds. They weren't a mob, they moved with quiet efficiency, checking maps on weathered phones, sharing nods that spoke volumes without words. Ethan joined her at the window, his breath warm against the cool glass. "They're here for you," he said simply, as if summoning a brotherhood across the miles was as ordinary as dawn itself. Olivia turned to him, her ponytail loosening in the draught from the open door, strands framing a face etched with disbelief. "Why? You barely know me." His smile returned, that same one from the diner, patient, unyielding, like the slow grind of gears shifting into gear. "Because I know the look of someone carrying a load they shouldn't, and I've got a promise of my own to keep. Made it years ago after the war took too much, to stand for the ones the world forgets." The story spilled out then, in the soft light filtering through the blinds. Ethan's past, a mosaic of loss and rebirth, a younger version of himself, fresh from the sands of distant conflicts, burying a comrade under foreign skies. The dying man's last words, a vow to protect the home front, the everyday warriors like waitresses and mechanics who held the line without fanfare. Ethan had carried that weight through the years, drifting from one horizon to the next until the Iron Vow gave it form. No glory in it, just the steady hum of loyalty, the kind that didn't shout but endured. Olivia listened, her mug cooling untouched, as the pieces of her own fractured life began to realign in the telling. Her ex, Marcus, though she only whispered the name, hadn't just broken her. He'd woven her into a web of debts and threats, his connections to the underbelly of the nearby city turning a personal betrayal into something far darker. Outside, the crew assembled with purpose. A grizzled veteran named Jacob, his beard streaked with silver, handed out water bottles from a saddlebag, his voice a gravelly murmur as he coordinated routes. Beside him, Sarah, a no-nonsense rider with tattoos mapping her own scars, adjusted her helmet and scanned the horizon for any sign of trouble. They weren't vigilantes in the Hollywood sense. Their justice was measured, rooted in the moral code of those who'd seen corruption up close. Cops on the take, officials blind to the cries of the overlooked. Word had spread through the Vow's network overnight. Marcus was mobilizing, his rage fueled by unpaid scores, dragging in locals who'd profit from her silence. But the bikers rode not for confrontation, but for presence, the unyielding wall of solidarity that could turn the tide without a single raised fist. Olivia stepped onto the small balcony, the cool air nipping at her skin as she overlooked the gathering. The engines idled now, a collective purr that vibrated through the ground like a heartbeat. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the railing. "This isn't about fixing the past," he said, his voice blending with the morning breeze. "It's about riding into the future you deserve. No more awful, just forward, She nodded, a tear tracing the curve of her cheek, catching the light like a diamond in the dust. For the first time, the fear in her chest felt smaller, overshadowed by the warmth of engines and the quiet strength of strangers turned allies. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the bikes in molten light, the convoy prepared to move. Olivia grabbed her jacket, the decision crystallizing in the moment, no more hiding in the shadows of Willow Creek. Ethan mounted his ride, the leather seat creaking under him, and extended a hand. She took it, climbing on behind, her arms wrapping around his waist with a tentative grip that promised to tighten. The group fell into formation, a river of chrome and resolve flowing toward the open road. Marcus's shadow loomed, but so did the vow. 50 riders now, converging from every direction, their headlights piercing the fading night like stars aligning for redemption. The wind whipped through Olivia's hair as they accelerated, the scent of exhaust and freedom mingling in her lungs. Behind them, Willow Creek receded, a speck in the rear view, while ahead stretched the promise of justice, not vengeful, but poetic, the kind that healed through honor. Ethan glanced back once, his eyes meeting hers over his shoulder, and in that look was the spark of change. A biker and a waitress, bound by a midnight confession, ready to rewrite the script of awful into something unbreakable. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The highway unfurled like a ribbon of black silk under the rising sun, its edges blurred by the heat haze that shimmered off the asphalt. Olivia clung to Ethan's waist, her cheek pressed against the worn leather of his jacket, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing sync with the thrum of the engine beneath them. The wind tore at her ponytail, whipping loose strands across her face like fleeting memories, carrying the sharp tang of sagebrush and sun-baked earth. Behind her, the convoy stretched out, a gleaming serpent of chrome and resolve. 50 bikes strong now, their engines harmonizing in a deep, resonant growl that drowned out the doubts whispering in her mind. Willow Creek was a fading smudge in the distance, its diner neon long extinguished, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed forward like the horizon itself. Ethan led the pack, his broad shoulders cutting through the rush of air, gloved hands firm on the handlebars. He'd ridden these roads 100 times, from the dusty backlots of forgotten towns to the neon-veined arteries of the city, but today felt different, charged, like the air before a storm breaks. His thoughts drifted to the promise that had pulled him from solitude, not just the one etched in his soul from war-torn sands, but the fresh vow sparked in Olivia's eyes that dawn. She wasn't a damsel in some faded script. She was a survivor, her scars hidden beneath the diner uniform, but no less real. Marcus, her shadow from the past, wasn't just a bitter ex. He was a catalyst, tangled in webs of corruption that reached into the heart of Eldridge City, where crooked hands traded justice for greenbacks. As the miles blurred, the landscape shifted from open desert to the encroaching sprawl of suburbia, telephone poles marching like silent witnesses along the shoulder. Olivia lifted her head slightly, her arms tightening around Ethan as the first signs of the city appeared. Billboards touting false promises, strip malls with flickering lights. "Where are we going?" she called over the roar, her voice muffled but insistent. Ethan glanced back, his helmet visor reflecting the sun like a shield. "To face it head-on. Your old life doesn't get to chase you forever." He didn't sugarcoat. The iron vow didn't deal in illusions. Word from the network had confirmed it. Marcus was holed up in a rundown warehouse on the city's edge, flanked by locals who'd sworn to protect the innocent but bent for the highest bidder. A sheriff's deputy with a gambling habit, a judge who'd overlooked too many accidents, the kind of rot that festered in the cracks of small-town authority. The convoy slowed as they approached the city limits, engines downshifting to a purposeful rumble that turned heads in the early morning traffic. Truckers pulled over, eyes widening at the leather-clad phalanx rolling through, while joggers on the sidewalk paused mid-stride, phones forgotten in their hands. Jacob rode flank left, his silver-streaked beard whipping in the wind. Radio clipped to his vest, crackling with updates from scouts ahead. "Clear so far, but they're watching." His voice cut through Ethan's earpiece, gravelly and calm. Sarah flanked right, her bike hugging the curve with precision, her tattooed arms flexing as she signaled the group to tighten formation. They weren't storming gates. This was presence, a living testament to loyalty that no badge could corrupt. Olivia's heart pounded against Ethan's back, a staccato beat that mirrored the pulse of the road. Flashes of the past assaulted her, the way Marcus's charm had soured into control, isolating her from friends, twisting her world until the diner shift was her only escape. He'd left bruises that faded, but the fear lingered, amplified by the threats that followed his departure. Calls in the dead of night, shadows lurking outside her window. Now, with the vow at her side, it felt like reclaiming ground, lost in the dark. "I never thought I'd ride out like this," she admitted, her words lost to the wind, but felt in the way her grip steadied. Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see it, his own memories surfacing like ghosts on the rear view, the comrade's final breath, the vow whispered over a grave far from home. "Sometimes the road chooses you. We're just along for the honor." They veered off the main artery onto a service road, the pavement rougher now, potholes jolting through the frame like reminders of life's uneven path. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a labyrinth of rusted metal and chain-link fences, the air thickening with the metallic bite of industry and neglect. Ethan signaled a halt at the perimeter, the convoy fanning out in a semicircle that blocked the entrance without aggression. Bikes idling, riders dismounting with the quiet discipline of those who'd faced worse than words. Olivia slid off behind him, her legs shaky on the gravel, but her chin lifted as she took in the scene. The building squatted like a forgotten beast, graffiti-scarred walls hiding who knew what dealings inside. From the shadows of the loading dock, figures emerged. Marcus first, his frame lean and coiled, flanked by two men in ill-fitting uniforms that screamed compromise. His eyes locked on Olivia, narrowing with a mix of surprise and fury. But the sight of the vow gave him pause. 50 riders, unmoving, their vests a wall of embroidered oaths, stood as one. Ethan stepped forward, removing his helmet with deliberate slowness, the sun catching the faint scars on his jaw. "This ends today," he said, voice carrying like a judge's gavel, low but unyielding. "No more shadows for her. Walk away clean, or the truth rides with us." Marcus sneered, but it faltered under the weight of the assembly, the moral force of men and women who'd chosen family over fracture. "You don't know who you're messing with," he spat, gesturing to his backups, who shifted uneasily, badges glinting falsely in the light. Olivia stepped up beside Ethan, her voice steady for the first time in memory. "I do, and I'm done running." The air hung thick, tension coiling like a spring, but no fists flew. Instead, Jacob pulled out a recorder from his saddlebag, playing back voices, anonymous tips, recorded confessions from the underbelly, evidence of the corruption that had shielded Marcus's debts. The deputies' faces paled, the illusion cracking under the light of exposure. Sarah moved in, her presence a quiet storm, handing over printed affidavits to the men in uniform. "Your badges don't buy silence anymore. The vow sees everything." It wasn't brute force. It was the poetry of justice, the slow unraveling of lies through the unbreakable chain of loyalty. Marcus's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him like air from a punctured tire. He glanced at Olivia one last time, the awful truth of his choices reflected back, then turned away, vanishing into the warehouse gloom, with his allies scattering like leaves in the wind. The convoy lingered only long enough to ensure the threat dissolved, engines revving softly as riders shared nods of quiet victory. Olivia turned to Ethan, the sun warming her face, tears of release stinging her eyes. "You changed everything," she whispered, the words a bridge from midnight confession to morning light. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture simple, profound. "We all did. Promises kept. That's the real ride." As they mounted up again, the group reformed, heading back toward the open road, the city shrinking in the mirrors. The wind carried away the last echoes of fear, replaced by the hum of freedom and the bonds that outlasted scars. Redemption wasn't a single turn, it was the endless highway, paved with honor and the family you forged along the way. The sun hung high now, a relentless orb scorching the asphalt as the convoy carved its way back through the suburban sprawl toward the open embrace of the highway. Olivia rode pillion behind Ethan, her arms still wrapped around his solid frame, but the grip had shifted from tentative survival to something resembling anchor. The wind rushed past like a cleansing gale, tugging at her jacket and carrying away the stale metallic tang of the warehouse district. Her hair, fully unbound now, streamed behind like a banner of newfound liberty, the scent of leather and exhaust mingling with the faint, earthy perfume of wild grasses bordering the road. The engines thrummed in unison, a mechanical heartbeat that pulsed through her veins, syncing her ragged breaths to the rhythm of motion. Ethan's posture remained steady, his focus on the road ahead, but she could feel the subtle tension in his shoulders easing with each mile marker they passed. The confrontation at the warehouse replayed in her mind like a film reel stuttering to a close. Marcus's sneer crumbling under the weight of exposed truths, the deputies' badges losing their shine in the face of recorded whispers and affidavits. No shots fired, no chaos, just the quiet power of presence, the Iron Vows code manifesting as an unbreakable shield. Yet, as Eldridge City's skyline faded into the rear view, a new undercurrent stirred in Olivia's chest. Gratitude warred with uncertainty. She'd stepped into this whirlwind on faith. But what came next? The awful chapter of her past might be closing, but the blank pages ahead felt vast, uncharted. They pulled off at a roadside rest stop, a gravel lot flanked by weathered picnic tables, and a cluster of ancient oaks that offered scant shade against the midday blaze. The convoy dispersed with practiced ease, bikes kicking up dust as riders stretched legs numb from hours in the saddle, sharing water bottles and low murmurs of satisfaction. Jacob leaned against his machine, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana, his silver beard catching the light like frost on steel. "Clean work back there," he grunted to Ethan, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "The network's already buzzing, words out that the shadows in Eldridge just got a little brighter." Sarah, ever the sentinel, scanned the perimeter with sharp eyes, her tattoos glistening with perspiration as she passed out energy bars from her pack. Olivia dismounted, her boots crunching on the loose stones, and took a moment to steady herself against Ethan's bike. The chrome frame was warm under her palm, vibrating faintly even at rest, a reminder of the life it breathed into the road. Ethan removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-dampened hair, his grey eyes meeting hers with that same patient intensity. "You holding up?" he asked, voice low amid the group's easy chatter. She nodded, but the words tumbled out anyway, unbidden. "It's just... I thought ending it would feel like relief. But now, it's like I've traded one cage for the wind. What if they come back? What if this pulls you all into more than you bargained for?" He guided her to a bench beneath the oaks, the wood rough and sun-bleached. Sitting close enough that their knees brushed, the air here carried the subtle rot of fallen leaves mixed with the sharper bite of diesel from passing semis. Ethan's expression softened, lines etching deeper around his eyes, marks of roads travelled and burdens carried. "The vow doesn't bargain half measures. That promise I mentioned, it's not just words from the war. Lost my sister young, to a system that looked away when it should have stepped in. Swore I'd never let that happen again, not to anyone who crosses my path. He paused, gazing out at the riders mingling like a family reunited after storm, laughter punctuating the air. You're part of it now if you want, not as a rescue but as one of us, chosen, not chained. Olivia's throat tightened, the offer landing like rain on parched earth. Around them, the group embodied that bond, a young rider named Tyler, fresh-faced but steady, sharing a story with an older woman called Grace, her laugh a rare bloom amid the grit. They weren't flawless. Scars peeked from collars, eyes held shadows of their own losses, but their loyalty wove them tighter than blood. She thought of her own fractured ties, the friends who drifted when Marcus's control tightened, the family scattered by time and distance. Here, in this ragtag assembly, was something real, forged in the fire of shared rides and silent stands. As the sun dipped toward afternoon, casting long shadows across the lot, a faint buzz cut through the respite, phones lighting up in unison. Ethan checked his, brow furrowing. Echoes from the city. Marcus isn't done. He's stirring up noise with old contacts, trying to paint us as the villains. The group gathered instinctively, forming a loose circle around a portable table where Jacob unrolled a faded map. Markers dotted potential trouble spots, backroad motels, a corrupt outpost on the county line. Sarah traced a route with her finger, her voice crisp. We loop south, skirt the hot zones. Show them we're not hiding, but we're not fools either. Olivia stood at the edge, pulse quickening, but Ethan's hand found hers, a brief, grounding squeeze. "This is the ride," he said quietly. "Not just away from awful, but toward what matters. You in?" She met his gaze, the oaks rustling overhead like whispered affirmations, and nodded. All the way. The convoy reformed with renewed purpose, engines igniting in a cascade of roars that scattered birds from the branches. Olivia climbed back on, the saddle familiar now, her body molding to the curve of the journey. They rolled out onto the highway, the wind rising once more, carrying the promise of horizons unbroken. But as the miles stretched, a distant siren wailed, a harbinger perhaps of the moral crossroads still to come. Ethan's lead bike cut the air like a blade, the vow trailing in vigilant formation, their lights flickering like stars against the encroaching dusk. Olivia leaned into the turn, heart steady, the biker's smile from that midnight diner echoing in her soul, ready to change everything, one faithful mile at a time. If this chapter moved you, smash that like button. It helps these stories of redemption reach more hearts on the road. The dusk settled over the highway like a velvet shroud, the sky bleeding from gold to indigo as the convoy pressed southward, engines humming a vigilant lullaby against the encroaching night. Olivia's arms encircled Ethan's waist, her body attuned now to the subtle sway of the bike, the way it absorbed the road's imperfections like a trusted companion. The wind had cooled, carrying the crisp bite of pine from the rolling foothills that flanked their path, mingling with the ever-present leather and oil that clung to her skin. Headlights pierced the gloom ahead, a chain of glowing eyes stretching back through the pack, 50 riders, their formation tight and unyielding. A mobile fortress against the shadows Marcus might yet summon. Ethan's grip on the handlebars was ironclad, his focus sharpened by the siren's wail that had faded into memory but lingered in his thoughts like an unanswered echo. The map's warnings replayed in his mind. Hot zones where corruption bloomed unchecked, deputies with badges tarnished by backroom deals. He'd seen it before, in the war's aftermath, when home-front betrayals cut deeper than enemy fire. The Vow's network buzzed in his earpiece. Fragmented updates from scouts. Movement on the county line. They're mobilizing, but slow. Keep south. Jacob's voice crackled through, steady as the gravel under their tires. We've got eyes everywhere, no surprises. Olivia shifted slightly, her chin resting on Ethan's shoulder, the vibration of the engine rumbling through her chest like a second heartbeat. The rest stops Oaks, and easy chatter felt worlds away now, replaced by the highway's isolation, where doubts could multiply like fireflies in the dark. "That siren," she said over the roar, her words whipping away but clear enough in the shared space between them. "It felt like a warning, like this isn't over." Ethan nodded, visor reflecting the first stars pricking the canopy above. "Warnings are just roads untraveled. We choose ours." His voice held the quiet conviction of promises etched in loss, the sister gone too soon, the comrade's vow that had birthed the iron vow. For him, this ride was redemption's thread, weaving Olivia into the fabric of chosen kin. The convoy crested a rise, the landscape dipping into a valley where sodium lamps dotted a cluster of low-slung buildings, a roadside outpost masquerading as neutral ground, but whispers marked it as a nexus for the crooked. Sarah signaled from her flank position, her bike weaving close, arm cutting the air in a sharp gesture to slow. The group decelerated in unison, engines downshifting to a throaty purr that echoed off the canyon walls. Ethan pulled to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires as the pack formed a protective arc. Dust settled in lazy swirls, illuminated by brake lights, the air thick with the scent of heated rubber and tension. Dismounting, Olivia's boots hit the ground with a solid thud, her legs steadier than before, though her pulse raced like an idling motor. The outpost loomed ahead, a squat diner much like the one in Willow Creek, its sign buzzing erratically, flanked by a gas station where shadows moved behind pumps. Riders fanned out subtly, Tyler checking the perimeter with youthful vigilance, Grace murmuring into her radio, her lined face a map of quiet battles won. Jacob approached Ethan. Bandana tied back, eyes scanning the lot. "Scouts say Marcus's crew is en route, not direct but close. They're leaning on locals to set a trap, roadblock ahead, maybe a false call to draw us in." Olivia's breath caught, the word trap landing like a stone in still water. Memories flickered, Marcus's late-night rages, the way he'd twist words into weapons, isolating her until the world shrank to his control. But here, under the vast sky, she wasn't alone. Ethan's hand brushed her arm, a fleeting anchor. "We don't walk into it blind," he said, pulling a worn tablet from his saddlebag, its screen glowing with a digital overlay of the route. Red markers pulsing like warnings from the vow's vast web. Sarah joined them, her tattooed fingers tapping coordinates. "Bypass the block, cut through the old service trail. It'll add miles, but it'll keep us clean." The group huddled, voices low and purposeful, the circle a bastion of leather and resolve. No panic, just the measured cadence of those who'd forged family from fracture. Olivia listened, her fear ebbing into resolve. These weren't strangers anymore. They were the promise she'd glimpsed in Ethan's diner smile, the kind that outlasted awful nights. A young rider, Nathan, handed her a spare jacket from his pack, its iron vow patch rough under her fingers. "Fits better than running alone," he said with a nod, his eyes holding the same unyielding light she'd seen in Ethan. As the plan solidified, the distant growl of approaching engines cut the night, a rival rumble, not the vow's harmonious thunder. Headlights crested the valley's edge, 3 vehicles slicing through the dark, unmarked sedans, their tires humming with intent. The outpost's lights caught the glint of badges inside, but the vow knew better. These were the compromised, the ones who'd trade oaths for envelopes of cash. Ethan stepped forward, helmet under one arm, his stance a silent declaration. "Hold formation," he murmured to the group, then raised his voice just enough to carry. "We're passing through. No need for roads to cross ugly tonight." The lead sedan slowed, windows rolling down to reveal stern faces etched with false authority. A voice barked from the driver's side, amplified by a speaker. "Pull over. We have reports of a disturbance. Everyone off the bikes." Olivia tensed, her hand finding Ethan's, but he didn't flinch. Instead, Jacob activated a dash cam feed, broadcasting live to the network, transparency as armor. Sarah's voice cut in softly over the earpiece. "Backup's 10 minutes out. We've got the recordings ready." The air hung heavy, the scent of exhaust thickening as the sedans idled, engines purring like predators. Ethan met the deputy's gaze across the divide, his words measured, carrying the weight of moral ground. Disturbance? Or just echoes of debts unpaid? We've got names, dates. The truth rides with us. The man in the sedan shifted, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as phones buzzed in the Vow's hands. Evidence compiling in real time. No charges flew. It was a standoff of integrity against erosion, the biker's presence a mirror reflecting the corruption back. Minutes stretched, taut as bowstrings, until the sedans peeled away with a squeal of tires, vanishing into the night like smoke. Relief washed over the group as engines reignited, the convoy surging forward onto the service trail, a narrower path of cracked pavement winding through scrubland, stars wheeling overhead like witnesses to their passage. Olivia leaned into Ethan, the wind rising anew, cooler now with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. "That was close," she breathed, her voice steadier. He glanced back, the trail's twists illuminating his scarred profile. "Closeness builds the bond. You're not just along for the ride, you're the reason." The miles unspooled under moonlight, the outpost fading, but the night's lessons lingered. Justice wasn't a blaze, but a steady flame, kindled by loyalty's unbreaking chain. Ahead, the trail promised open sky, but Marcus's shadow whispered of one final turn. Olivia held on, the biker's smile from that fateful diner fueling her forward. The change, once a spark, now a roaring truth. The service trail twisted through the moonlit scrubland, like a vein pulsing under the earth's skin, its cracked surface alive with the crunch of tires and the low symphony of engines straining against the incline. Olivia's body had molded to the ride now, her arms a steady band around Ethan's midsection, the warmth of him seeping through leather like a promise against the night's chill. The wind whispered secrets through the Joshua trees, carrying the faint, acrid scent of distant wildfires, mingled with the sharp ozone of impending rain. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the convoy's determined crawl. 50 bikes weaving in fluid formation, headlights carving silver paths through the gloom, the Iron Vow's emblem glinting like badges of unyielding honor. Ethan's focus never wavered, his gloved hands guiding the bike with the precision of a man who'd navigated worse than shadowed trails. The standoff at the outpost replayed in fragments, the sedan's hesitant retreat, the deputies' faces twisting under the glare of live feeds and unassailable truths. But the earpiece crackled again, Sarah's voice slicing through the rush of air. Final intel from the network. Marcus is pinned at the old mill bridge, last crossing before the state line. He's got a skeleton crew, desperate. No badges this time, just his rot. Jacob chimed in from the flank, his tone a gravelly anchor. "We end it clean, presence over punch." Olivia lifted her head, the cool rush stinging her cheeks, her unbound hair a wild halo in the slipstream. The trail's isolation amplified every doubt, every echo of Marcus's venom, the way he'd once cornered her in their dim apartment, words sharper than any blade, promising protection that turned to possession. "One final turn," she murmured against Ethan's back, the words half lost to the wind but heavy with resolve. He reached back briefly, his hand covering hers in a squeeze that spoke volumes. The vow from his war-scarred past, the one that had summoned this brotherhood from scattered horizons. "We've turned worse. Together." The trail spat them out onto a broader stretch, the mill bridge looming ahead like a rusted skeleton, arched over a dry riverbed, its iron girders groaning faintly in the breeze. Moonlight bathed the structure in ethereal silver, casting long shadows that danced with the flicker of a single lantern swinging from a post. The convoy slowed to a halt on the approach, engines idling to a collective purr that vibrated through the ground like the Earth's own warning. Riders dismounted in silence, boots scuffing the gravel shoulder, forming a loose perimeter without a word. Tyler's youthful vigilance scanning the tree line, Grace's steady hand on her radio, Nathan and the others, a wall of leather and quiet strength. Ethan killed his engine last, the sudden hush amplifying the distant lap of water in the riverbed below, a forgotten trickle mocking the dryness above. Olivia stood beside him, her breath visible in the cooling air, the scent of damp stone rising like an omen. Marcus emerged from the bridge's shadow, alone at first, his frame gaunt under the lantern's glow, eyes hollowed by the chase's toll. No entourage now. His corrupt allies had scattered like rats from a sinking hull, the vow's evidence rippling through channels that even he couldn't bribe. Flanked by the riders, Ethan stepped forward, his boots deliberate on the cracked pavement, Olivia a pace behind, her chin lifted in defiance born of the miles they'd shared. "You brought a circus," Marcus sneered, his voice echoing off the girders, laced with the bitterness of a man cornered by his own unravelling. But the words fell flat against the assembly's unblinking resolve, the air thick with the unspoken weight of truths laid bare. Ethan stopped short of arm's reach, his grey eyes steady, reflecting the lantern's flame like embers of judgment. "No circus, just promises kept. Yours broke her, ours rebuilds." He didn't raise a voice. Didn't need to. The vow's presence was the gavel, 50 souls standing as testament to loyalty's quiet thunder. Olivia's heart hammered, a storm in her chest, but she stepped level with Ethan, the night air nipping at her exposed skin. "It's over, Marcus. The debts, the threats, they end here. Not with you dragging me back, but with me riding forward." Her words carried the diner's midnight fragility, transformed into steel, forged in the convoy's fire. Marcus's gaze flicked between them, the fight draining like sand through fingers, his shoulders slumping under the lantern's unforgiving light. No violence erupted. Instead, Jacob approached from the side, extending a simple envelope, affidavits, recordings, a path to clean surrender compiled by the network's unseen hands. "Walk away whole," Jacob said, his silver beard catching the moon, "or the road takes you down." The bridge creaked as Marcus hesitated, the wind rising to whip dust across the span, carrying the faint, cleansing promise of rain. Sarah watched from the perimeter, her tattooed arms crossed, a sentinel of the chosen family that had enveloped Olivia like a shield. In that suspended moment, the moral poetry unfolded, not a blaze of retribution, but the slow erosion of corruption by integrity's tide. Marcus took the envelope, his hands trembling, then turned without another word, vanishing into the night beyond the bridge. A shadow, finally eclipsed. Relief cascaded through the group like the first drops of rain pattering on metal, engines reigniting in a cascade of life-affirming roars. The convoy reformed, crossing the bridge as one, the structure trembling under their passage, not with threat, but with the weight of journeys ending and new ones dawning. Olivia remounted behind Ethan, the saddle welcoming her like an old friend, her arms wrapping tighter as they accelerated into the open expanse beyond. The state line blurred past, an invisible threshold marking the awful surrender, the wind now laced with petrichor, washing clean the scars of what had been. Miles later, as dawn's first blush kissed the eastern sky, they pulled into a sunlit clearing off the highway, a meadow ringed by pines, where the air hummed with birdsong and the scent of dew-kissed grass. Bikes circled to a stop, riders stretching and sharing quiet laughs, the bond palpable in every shared glance. Ethan dismounted, helping Olivia down with a gentleness that belied his rugged frame, his smile returning, that diner grin now etched with victory's warmth. "Changed everything?" he asked, echoing her words from the night. She nodded, tears tracing clean paths down her cheeks, the meadow's light gilding them like hope. "More than that, you gave me a family, a road worth riding." Around them, the vow gathered, Jacob raising a thermos in toast, Sarah clapping Olivia's shoulder with sisterly solidarity, Tyler and Grace weaving tales of rides yet to come. No blood ties, but stronger. Chosen, unbreakable, the legacy of promises that outlasted storms. As the sun climbed, painting the world in gold, the convoy prepared to scatter, not in fracture, but in the fluid grace of lives intertwined. Olivia lingered with Ethan, their hands linked, the horizon stretching endless before them. Redemption wasn't a destination etched on a map. It was this, the quiet honor of standing, the thrill of forward motion, the smile that turned awful into unbreakable. The road called once more, but now they answered as one. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these stories of promises kept touch your soul, hit that subscribe button and join the vow. More tales of redemption await on the horizon.